Hello team and welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MSP. This is Ukraine War Frontline update for the 24th of July 2023. Let's get straight to our front line. We'll go to the northeast sector thereof. That's the Kupiansk to Kreminna front line, bypassing Svatova here. And there is quite a bit of activity being reported here in the Luhansk Oblast. Has been over the last 24 hours. On my map, that looks like this. And just to let you know that there are three lines on my map. The blue line represents the pro-Ukrainian mapper, Andrew Perpetua. That's the Russian defensive line that he has. The red line is the pro-Russian mapper Syriac maps, giving the Russian defensive line. And the white line is the pro-Ukrainian mapper Deep State map, giving where they saw the defensive line on the 30th of May. So it gives you an idea of where each side has progressed since the beginning of the Ukrainian counteroffensive. Now, if we come down to the main area of activity, that is here around Karmazianivka, Kovalivka, and indeed up to Ryorodka. There is some serious land being grabbed by the Russians here. And the first thing to say is that if this has happened, and ISW is casting some doubts over the extent of the Russian gains here, but if this has happened, this is testament to the power of minefields. When you don't have minefields, you can just waltz through the land where there aren't huge amounts of enemy soldiers. So the Russians here are able to get across the Zherebets River and just basically take all this land really, really quickly because the Ukrainians haven't sown all of these fields with thousands upon thousands of landmines. The ISW says, that's the Institute for the Study of War American Military think tank, the Russian mill bloggers claim that Russian forces crossed the Zherebets River west of Karmazianivka and made further advances on the west bank of the river towards Novohirivka. So if we go back to my map here, that's advancing from Karmazianivka to a settlement of Novohirivka, just up there, and extra gains. So yesterday we had the Russians sort of out to here, further gains by Andrew Perpetua and Syriac maps. So I would suggest that, I'm pretty confident in Andrew Perpetua's mapping being at least correct here, as in it could well be that Syriac maps is correct. So although the ISW does go on to say, one mill blogger claimed that Russian forces advance up to 4 kilometers in depth west of Karmazianivka, ISW has not seen visual confirmation of any recent Russian advances in the area. So 4 kilometers, if we look at where the lines would have been, that's about 4.8 kilometers. So yeah, from the Zherebets River here, that would be about 4 kilometers. So that's what the ISW is saying. Well, we haven't seen confirmation of that. They then go on to say Russian sources may be exaggerating Russian gains and Ukrainian offensive activity along the Kupiansk-Kreminna line to portray ongoing Ukrainian counteroffensive operations as a failure. ISW has observed recent Russian claims of Russian advances northeast of Kupiansk, southwest of Svatova, and west of Kreminna, although corroborating visual confirmation has not accompanied these claims. Russian sources previously amplified older footage on July the 8th to claim that Russian forces advanced near Torska, but the ISW has not observed any current visual confirmation of these claims. In other words, hey, we've just recently seen the Russians make some bogus claims about what has happened in Torska, where we had Syriac maps advancing right into Torska and footage suggesting that the Ukrainians were shelling Russians in that area. And then there was lots of clamor about, oh my goodness, the Russians have advanced quite a lot. And then subsequently, Syriac maps has walked their map back slightly, although not to where Andrew Perpetua has his. Could that be what is taking place up here in the Karmazianivka area? If we look at what one Ukrainian source is saying, the Karmazianivka sector in Luhansk is developing into a strategic threat and must not be underestimated. 2 infantry brigades will be enough to stabilize the line, but the order must be given now. Time is of the essence. So they're sort of panicking, saying, oh my goodness, Russians have got some good purchase here. across into Ukrainian lands across the Zherebets River, and they need to be stopped now before they can advance further. Global War Monitor says Russia has crossed the Zherebets River and has advanced across it to taking at least 3.5 square kilometers of land. And then Suryat Maps adds to what they'd previously said in terms of, so yesterday, if you remember, there was all this land around Kupiansk-Kreminna, but they are now adding another point of incursion across the river just to the north. So this is the only bit of sort of extra mapping they have added today across the whole front line, actually, Suryat Maps. But it's just this little area by Ryorodka where they say that the Russian army crossed the river from a secondary axis adjacent to the town of Ryorodka and reached the outskirts of Adiivka here. Although that is not particularly mentioned anywhere else, but it's not to say it's not happened. So the ISW, continues by saying the Russian Ministry of Defense claimed that Russian elements of the Central Grouping Forces repelled 6 Ukrainian assaults near Novovodyany and Kupiansk-Kreminna, 4 Ukrainian assaults at the Kreminna area, and Ukrainian assaults south of Kreminna and Bilorivka. So the Ukrainians fighting back in this area, putting on 6 attacks. That's according to the Russian MOD, and they were all repelled. Again, that's according to the Russian MOD. So we have Suryat Maps showing some further advances in the last 24 hours there. And we have Andrew Perpetua catching some mapping up with some of the Suryat Maps, increases in Russian territorial control, but not, there's still a lot of difference between these two mappers. So quite where the truth is, I guess we'll find out over the next day or so. But arguably that is a worry for Ukraine, as they are going to have to redirect some attention to that sector unless they really can try and repel the Russian incursion with existing forces, as we talked about in the area. Right, Andrew Perpetua's added some Russian gains, or at least, I don't know it's actually Russian gains in the last 24 hours. I think it's more likely rejigging the map to just finding evidence to support actually what Suryat Maps had already had with their mapping, which is this filtration plant on the eastern side of Bilorivka. The Russian control is just shy of that plant, as according to Andrew Perpetua, where he did have the line coming back somewhere back here. He's obviously got evidence, kind of shelling evidence. Maybe the Ukrainians are shelling Russian positions here, which would show that the Russians are there and not further back as he originally thought. But yeah, I don't think that's actual, Russian attack that has resulted in gains of territory there. Nonetheless, maybe something to think about. As we come down the Seversk fronts, we come to, again, northern area Rozdilivka, where we've just not heard anything now for about 5 days, which is really surprising because that's where the Ukrainians had a lot of success over a short period of time, and then suddenly don't hear about it at all. Just to let you know that the Ukrainian defense forces have said that they've taken 16 square kilometers of territory over the last week, 12 square kilometers in the south, and about 4 square kilometers around Bakhmut. And Bakhmut is still being something of a success for the Ukrainians. Let's dip into the ISW again. Ukrainian forces continue counteroffensive operations in the Bakhmut area and reportedly made gains near the city yesterday. A Ukrainian source reported that Ukrainian forces advanced northwest of Kromova, and a Russian mobile blogger claimed that Ukrainian forces pushed Russian forces to the city limits of the settlement. So that is in this northern area around Yahidne, Bakhivka. We have Kromove just north of there, the city, and that they are pressuring. I think that could be. We heard about there was success for the Ukrainians in pushing the Russians back around the Rose Alley, the Roses area at the north of the city. I don't know whether that is the Kromove gains for the Ukrainians, or whether they are actually gaining through here and into the very sort of northwestern parts of the city. We know that they are sort of around the edges of the city, all around this area now, and there is sort of sporadic fighting within the city limits. But I don't think it's wise for the Ukrainians to try and do some kind of urban warfare move through the city. street to street. I think that would be too attritional for them and not worth their while. What they want to do is fix the Russian troops there, bombard them from a distance, as they are apparently doing, and you know, have fire control over ground lines of communication into and out of the city, whilst also incrementally taking ground both north and south to attempt to operationally encircle the town. So, according to Russian source Rybar, Ukrainian army managed to go to the south of Klishivka village on the outskirts of Kupiansk and Avdiivka to the south of Bakhmut. That is to say that Klishivka here, Avdiivka there, Kupiansk there. The Ukrainians are arguably on the outskirts of each of those settlements. To be perfectly honest, Rybar, the pro-Russian source, their Telegram update doesn't give too much detail really on the whole front line. Their 2-day update for this weekend, it's not really worth sharing too much with you, so I won't. Ukraine has been geolocated to within 650 meters of Klishivka. That is according to Global War Monitor. There's some confusion really as to exactly where the Ukrainians are around here. I mean, 650 meters. We have heard that they are fighting within Klishivka. Basically, that means that they've been geolocated to, very close to, which is probably better than the Syriac maps is representing here. However, the question is, are they in Klishivka fighting in some of these streets? There was talk about them being in the north. Let's talk about them being in the south as well. They could well be fighting in Klishivka. The very minimum is that there's geolocation to suggest they are very close to it, which is kind of what we knew anyway, right? And then Global War Monitor goes back to the north, actually. The Ukraine are continuing to push the Russians along the E40 or the M03 highway by 600 meters, adding 0.6 square kilometers to the liberated status. That is coming out of here, popping to the north here, and having some success around this area. As you can see, there are 3 lines now in the Bakhmut area. That's the yellow line of Deep State Map's current lines. So you can see, as far as comparing like for like, you can see Deep State now to where Deep State was back at the end of May. So there are gains there. There are gains around the northwest of Bakhmut, and there are gains around Klishivka, and then down to Kupiansk. So that's a pretty decent like-for-like comparison there. But yeah, other than that, it's quite tight operationally. There's a lot of operational security going on, so it's difficult to get great granular information out. But I think Ukraine are continuing to have incremental success around Bakhmut. Finally, we'll see what No Report says, pro-Ukrainian blogger. To the front, the Bakhmut south axis. Russian sources report fighting in the southwestern outskirts of Klishivka. Russian sources report that the Ukrainians have reached very close to Avdiivka. This ties in with our previous reporting that Ukrainian 57th and 3rd is advancing from 2 tree lines. That may be referencing the claims from Rybar there, but the southwest would be here, so possibly they are fighting in Klishivka there and a lot closer to Avdiivka than maybe these mappers are suggesting, and then activity around Kupiansk. Right, as we come out of Bakhmut, we come down to Avdiivka, and there isn't too much to mention about Avdiivka, which has been the sort of same for the 3 or 4 days. Yes, there's activity all around, but no particular exchanges of territory and nothing too newsworthy. Russians repelled Ukrainian assaults near Vodyane, so that is this area. So the Ukrainians attacking back there at the moment. But actually, this has been an area, and particularly to the south of Avdiivka, where the Russians have been attacking over the last 3 or 4 days quite consistently. So they, I don't know whether it's right to say they got the initiative, but they're certainly putting the pressure on themselves, on the Ukrainians. The Russians are claiming that, the Ukrainian General Staff are claiming the Russians attacked near Avdiivka, Novelska, Krasnohorivka, Marinka, and Novomykhailivka. So a number of these places are further to the south. Novelska, a small agricultural settlement that stops the Russians from surrounding Pervomaisky. still holding out. The Russians attacking there. They're attacking at Krasnohorivka, across to the mine there. I haven't heard too much since Suryat map still has Russian control of the mine. I don't think that is the case. It'll be at most in the grey zone. If not, the Russians have retreated back after getting a bloody nose trying to attack there. And then Marinka and Novomikhailivka to the south again. As we come further down to the south, past the kind of dogleg here around Vuhledar, still in the Donetsk Oblast, we move to the west and across to the Velika Novosilka salient. There's no news coming out of Pavlika, Vuhledar, Volodymyrivka over the last 24 hours. So let's try and make some sense of what's going on in Staromyorsk area. The ISW says geolocated footage published on July the 22nd shows Ukrainian forces have entered northern Staromyorsk, though the extent of the current Ukrainian positions in or near the settlement is unclear. A Russian mill blogger claimed that Ukrainian forces advanced north of Staromyorsk and on the northern outskirts of Pryutny. There are varying claims as to Ukrainian success around this northwestern area that both mappers still have under Russian control, but that may not be the case. Depends with Andrew Perpetua with his mapping. It depends on the clarity of the skies. If there's cloud cover, he's unable to do some of the mapping that he likes to do, looking at like shelling patterns and whatnot. So let's go and have a look at the geolocated footage. That is a Russian airstrike on Ukrainian-held positions. So these are Ukrainian positions here, and that is behind where Suryat Maps has the Russians. And this is exactly what we were saying yesterday, right on this northern road here, where there's a few bits of equipment from both sides that have been destroyed over the course of the conflict here. The Ukrainians are definitely at least here because exactly, we've seen that there's an airstrike that's taken place and they've lost some equipment there, arguably fighting in this area to the north of this northern part of Staromyorsk. And I think that's still ongoing today. If we look at some of the sources here, no report says the Ukrainians have progressed further into the grey zone 3 kilometers. Oh no, sorry, that's not Velika Novosilka. That is, that's wrong. That's talking about Kamyansky, so they've actually got the wrong place there. We'll come back to that then later. If we look at the map there, that's Robotna and Zerebianki. So actually, no reports has got that wrong. We'll move that across to our next one. If we look at a few of the other sources, so I shared this with you this morning. Radu Hosu, the Romanian analyst, saying in this area, if we come down, Velika Novosilka, where are you here? So Velika Novosilka axis, Ukrainians have already liberated half of Staromyorsk, so he's claiming they've liberated half of it. Russian sources claim it's already liberated by the Ukrainians. Not too sure about that. I think that's a little bit too positive, really. And on the other side of the river, they have entered Urizhany. So this is this river here, small river, and the idea is that they've entered Urizhany. We know they're fighting to the north of Urizhany. Whether they have advanced from Staromyorsk across the river there, I don't know. That's what the claim is here. It doesn't seem to be backed up by any other sources that I've seen. Another source says in the Pryutny area, the Ukrainian armed forces significantly expanded the zone of control of the settlement, north of the settlement, and moved to the rear of the Russian positions located even further north in the Staromyorsk direction. The Russians are trying with all their might to hold out near Staromyorsk and Urizhany. The fierce battles are going on. Slowly, every inch of land will be returned. It is the claim, but so a lot of fierce fighting taking place in the Staromyorsk and Pryutny area still. No, as I say, no mapping changes, but it seems that things could be going slightly better for the Ukrainians. It's been a bit of a stasis there for some time. Ukrainian General Staff reported Ukrainian forces repelled Russian attempts to retake lots of positions near Pryutny and south of Novodorivka. A Russian mill blogger claimed that Russian forces conducted a failed attack towards Blahodatny. So that is all in this kind of area. Blahodatny is, let's try and find where that is actually. That's a couple of times that's come up. Oh yeah, of course. It's one of the settlements just on this river running down. So it's just north of Makarivka. There it is. It just appears when I zoom in. So that's north of Staromilsk. So north of Staromilsk, the Russians are attempting to counterattack both north of Pripyat and from Staromilsk, but apparently with no success. So that is the activity taking place there. We'll move to the west, continue towards now. Apparently, there's activity around Drozhnyanka at the moment, which is the first time we've heard about that for a few days. And then we move on to this Robotna area. Let's go and look at our different sources. So, Null report says, and now we're really there. The Ukrainians have progressed further into the grey zone, 3 kilometers southeast of Kamyansky. So this is on the western edge of the Zaporizhia front line. So we have Robotna, then we go towards Piaty-Khatki and Zerebianki, and then we have Kamyansky that split north and south by the river, Dnipro River, as it comes in there. And the Ukrainians are pushing to the south through towards Vasilivka, which is this important logistical hub, again on the edge of the reservoir. And sorry, no reports continues. Geolocated footage shows Ukrainians being targeted in a tree line. This area is somewhat south of the area reportedly under Ukrainian control, south of the river, which is to say that there is, if we can kind of zoom in here, if his pointing there is accurate, you've got a tree line coming down there, and the Ukrainians are somewhat south of that. That looks like the Ukrainians are south, could be as far down as here. And if that is the case, that is some decent advancing in that Kamyansky area. Global War Monitor going back to Robotna. So we zoom out of here. We're going to be flipping between the two with the different sources. In the Robotna area, which is, oops, not there, further to the west, here we are. Global War Monitor says Ukrainian forces are now 700 meters from the Russian-controlled and now contested settlement, and that 2.2 square kilometers has been added to the liberated status. So they are claiming land taken in this area there. We then have no reports reporting that Osman, who was fighting up in Bakhmut, has now been promoted and pushed down to Robotna. And yesterday there were reports of Ukrainian advances near Kamyanska, we just talked about, and fighting near Drozhnyanka. So that's where that claim is about, Drozhnyanka. And then if we go back to the ISW, they talk about Ukrainian forces continuing offensive operations in western Zaporizhia, advancing yesterday. And geolocated footage shows that Ukrainian forces made marginal advances south of Kamyanska. And these are the geolocated footage. There's that kind of tree line I was talking to you about. Let's just get the coordinates and put them into our good friend Google Earth. And we come out of Robotna back to where we were. Yeah, and it's exactly what I was talking about, around this sort of tree line there. That is a marginal gain for the Ukrainians if that is area that they control, rather than just being there attacking and then retreating. So some, all of these variations of kind of interpreting these data are plausible. So it could be that they've got there, retreated, could be the control there, could be they've advanced past there, but they have at least been there in the last 24 hours. So that signifies a move forward to some degree. Right. So that's what's happening. There could well be successful activity around the Robotna area. There are various claims concerning Robotna. If we go back to the ISW, Ukrainian Tversk Group of Forces spokesperson Shershen reported that Ukrainian forces advanced over 2 kilometers into Russian defensive positions and across the front line in the Melitopol direction between July 21st and 22nd. Now, generally, the Melitopol direction is seen as either, it's usually Robotna. Vasilivka direction is Kamyanska or here around Piaty-Khatki, and then Berdyansk direction is from Velika Novosilka. So there could be a 2-kilometer advance for the Ukrainians in this area, which would be fairly significant because that's something like that. but depends what you're talking about. Whether you're talking about in the grey zone, consolidating the grey zone and pushing to here, then it might not have as huge an effect on the defensive lines as one might think. It just depends how much of that land is actually grey zone. So as we then come to the rest of what the ISW say, and they flip back to Robotna. The Russian MOD claimed that Russian forces repelled 2 Ukrainian ground attacks near there, and that Russian mil bloggers claim that Ukrainian forces conducted waves of mechanized attacks towards Robotna overnight from the 22nd to the 23rd. And on the 23rd, so yesterday, and not last night, but the night before. Of course, last night is not reported in the ISW. Their report comes out before the night sets in. But that the Russian forces supposedly repelled those attacks. So there's a lot of activity going on in Robotna. And it seems actually Kamyanska, that's kind of, they're obviously finding a bit of a weakness there and exploiting that. Maybe it's that they found Zerebianki too difficult, so they're trying to bypass that village by coming from the northwest and down to Lohove. And then when it comes to here, Kherson, the Antonivsky Bridge, there have been some claims that the Russians have been pushed back to Oleshki, that actually they don't have control of this whole area. I don't have confirmation of that, but that was what reporting from Ukraine was intimating in their video last night. Ukrainian Russian forces, says the ISW, continue to skirmish on the east bank of the Dnipro and the Dnipro Delta Islands. A Russian mill blogger claimed that Ukrainian forces still maintain a presence on the east bank near Oleshki, and that Ukrainian special forces are probing Russian defenses near Holopristan and Krinky. So that is Holopristan is south of Kherson there, and Krinky I think is to the north somewhere. Yeah, that's Kari. I'm fairly sure it's to the north, but I don't know exactly where. I might have to find that. So, oh yeah, there it is. So there's Krinky. So the special forces are probing and attacking, looking for weaknesses in various areas. Ukrainian Southern Operational Command spokesperson Humenyuk reported that the airborne units, Russian VDV, and other special units are deployed along the Dnipro River and attempt sabotage activities along the river and on the Delta Islands. Also states that the Russian military command transfers degraded units from various parts of the front to Kherson to recover. So maybe they see it as a bit of an easier place all along that front line. Kherson is slightly easier because of the river. Russian forces recently established training grounds on Jalyach Island for this effort. So that island is here. We go back to the War Mapper map and come down. That's the island there. It's between Crimea and Kherson Oblast, or the Kherson mainland. You have an island where the Russians have set up some kind of training recovery base for their troops. I wonder whether that will become a target. Anyway, that's broadly what's happened. More information will be coming out, I'm sure, throughout the day, as it always does. I'm interested. I get a sense that, and even, Zelensky was saying, "Oh, things are going to gain pace now," and you're thinking, is that just wishful thinking? But there is a sense that maybe there are a few gains for the Ukrainians in these areas, but likewise, they're obviously under a lot of pressure in the Luhansk Oblast and are losing territory there. And the amount of territory that they can lose, I think, is more significant given that there are no minefields and defences, really, that not in the way that there is down in Zaporizhia and Donetsk, so that the Russians can advance with greater ease, and it'll be a case of, right, let's get the artillery and throw some ram shells up there and lay some mines quickly. That might be happening, I don't know. But anyway, that's the situation on the front line. Please let me know what you think. Please like, subscribe, and share. Thank you so much for your support. If you have the wherewithal and desire, there's always Buy Me a Coffee and PayPal, and also you can grab any of my books. If you want a summer read, you can check out Survival of the Fittest Metamorphosis and Survival of the Fittest Adaptation, a series of books I am writing. Please do so. Anyway, take care, and I'll speak to you soon.